Okay, we've got the fire review. Were you surprised at the amount of savings we could get out of this?
You know, the reason that we launched the zero-based reviews let me try that again. The reason we launched the zero-based reviews several years ago was precisely to look for these kinds of savings. And the reason they're called zero-based is really because you start with the basic outcomes that the department is trying to achieve, and you figure out the best ways to do that. And the thing I really like about this particular report is that the consultant went really far, and then we added on filters of what's realistic, what are council's expectations, what are the public's expectations, what can we actually live with, and ended up in a place where the vast majority of the consultant's recommendations were accepted. We thought a couple went too far, but the fire chief brought up a couple of new ideas to replace those cost savings, and we ended up with pretty significant future savings. And I have to highlight, these really are future savings. You know, there may be some in this operating budget, but what this really does is allow us to arrest the growth in the fire department budget over time, and I think that's a big deal. You know, we're looking at $15–16 million a year. That's a lot of money.
How careful do you have to tread when it comes to the issue of public safety versus saving dollars?
You know, the really good news about the conversation that we're having here in Calgary is that nobody on any side of this has really tried to engage in a bunch of demagoguery and, you know, houses will burn down if you do this. And we've really been able to have a very, very focused and rational discussion on what we should do, what we can afford, and how we keep people safe, and I'm very pleased with that.
Are you concerned about at all, because response times come up so much in that discussion, are you concerned about your lengthening, I guess, response time?
Well, that's not something that's being recommended right now, so let's be clear that that is one of the recommendations that has not been accepted. But I think that it's been very helpful for us to have this conversation of what does response time mean? You know, across North America, we have sort of adopted response time as the holy grail of outcomes. And what we really need to be able to do and have the opportunity to do in conversation with our colleagues in the fire department, whether frontline people or management, is what outcomes are we trying to achieve? Are those outcomes focused on protection of property, protection of people's lives? And what is the relationship between the response time and those outcomes we're trying to achieve? And you heard some of that conversation today in which it was said that try to boil everything down to 6 minutes or 7 minutes or 8 minutes is not actually helpful for us to figure out if we're protecting people's property and safety.
So the big cost savings was then cut to management?
Some of it, that's not all of it. Some of it is there. It has to do with this dynamic deployment model. And you know, the thing about the dynamic deployment is that it is very intriguing, and it is one of those things that we really are going to, if council adopts these recommendations, we're really going to measure very, very carefully. I'm very open-minded about it. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, then we'll continue to have conversations about how to make it better or what kind of deployment models we should use. But as we look across different jurisdictions and we see how they're using it, it's something that is really intriguing. So like much of what we do, you know, if these recommendations are accepted by council, we will really do this in a very thoughtful, methodical way and measure the heck out of it and ensure that it's working well both for citizens and for the folks who work in the Calgary Fire Department.
Why did administration resist, not agree with going further? Because as you said, the consultant wanted to go further in terms of cost savings.
There were two recommendations that administration is not recommending. The first one has to do with moving to 3-person response instead of 4-person response on a truck. And to be quite honest with you, the evidence is simply not there. And I fully agree with administration that the evidence is not there that this makes sense. The jurisdictions that have done it because they've been in budget crisis, and a number of them have reversed that decision immediately when they got out of budget crisis. So I just don't think there's any evidence there to do that, and I think that's a little bit too risky. The other one is really this issue of response times. And part of the question is, should we have differential response times in new neighborhoods? And the question that I had is, have changes in building standards or neighborhood design move to a point where you could actually legitimately say these homes are safer, that they don't burn as quickly, and that it's okay if we arrive there seconds later. And I have not been satisfied personally, and I think administration is also not satisfied that that is in fact the case. You know, if, for example, you know, the building code now required every new home to be sprinklered, and every new home was, then I think we could have a legitimate discussion over whether we should have differential response times. I have seen no evidence myself that tells me that a fire in Silverado is any different than a fire in Temple, and that we should be able to deal with them differently.
So what was dynamic when not working? What does that look like?
Well, let's hope we don't cross that bridge. Oh, you're asking how we would measure it. You know, I will really leave that up to the experts to tell us how we look at it. But it really has to do, for me, the ultimate outcome is protection of people's property and protection of people's safety. And we have to figure out the right way to measure those things.
Given that point that the chief had mentioned there, towards the end, that, you know, fires in newer areas, because there's greater density, and you know, one house fire means you lose 3 houses, or you have 4 houses damaged. How is that a risk?
Well, you know, I think the other thing he said was that you balance that off with different materials that might be more fire safe. So I think it's very difficult for us to make any kind of an assessment at this point, at least with data I have in front of me, that different kinds of neighborhoods, you know, older single-family neighborhoods, newer single-family neighborhoods really have differentiated risk at all.
And do you share that concern if you move from a 7-minute initial response, it moves up to 8, you know, that means a higher percentage are looking at 10, 11, 12.
Well, you know, part of what we have to do in everything that we do at the city is ensure that we're meeting our targets. And so part of this issue really is seeing if we can meet the targets we have set. And if it's completely impossible, that doesn't mean that moving the goalpost means the reality will be even further away. It'll mean having a goalpost that we can actually reach. And to me, it doesn't make any sense to put in targets if you know you're not going to reach them. And I know that the chief and the fire department are very, very focused on making sure they do meet the targets. Now, if they turn out to be completely impossible, you know, there are neighborhoods in Calgary where it's just because of the road design and the natural features in that neighborhood, you have some serious challenges. And, you know, one of the real, very salient questions is if you have a neighborhood like that, do you actually build a fire hall that you know will never cover, well, they never cover their costs, so that's the wrong way of putting it, but you know will never have adequate call volume, but you have to have it just in case? Or do you figure out different ways to manage the situations in those neighborhoods? Those are very legitimate, very salient questions. But we have to look at them more broadly. So for example, our brand new neighborhoods, as you know, have very, very few cul-de-sacs or P-loops in them. This is right for a number of planning reasons, but one of the reasons it's right for is it makes emergency response much easier and allows you to actually get to more homes within that response time. So it's a very holistic thing that we have to look at broadly and ensure that everyone has safety, but it also is at a cost that we can afford. All right, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.